it's a couple minutes before. My name's Leigh Bluestein, and please come in and take our poll that I put up on the screen. And we will get started in a few minutes and introduce our panelists. So welcome, everybody. Okay. I think we'll leave the poll open for just a few more minutes. Sorry. All right, well, it is 10 o'clock, and I see that we have about 60 people here with us, so I'm going to go ahead and just get started. Welcome. My name is Leigh Bluestein. I'm the Director of Communications and Education at CaringMatters, and we want to welcome you to our special online film discussion of the new documentary, Speaking Grief. The project was produced by WPSU Grief with support from the New York Life Foundation. And CaringMatters was chosen as an organization to host some screenings and discussions of the film. Obviously, with the pandemic, those plans pivoted, and instead of in-person events, we are now hosting our discussions online. So welcome, and the producers generously just made the documentary available online for everyone to view on August 30th. It's also airing on public television stations across the country. Again, I just want to encourage people to do the poll as they come in, just so we can kind of see who's here with us today. And then you can write messages in the chat feature. Everyone should be able to see those messages. Feel free to share comments if you want to chat about things that have helped you in your grief or things that really struck you in the film. Please feel free to share with everyone. And then also you can put questions into the Q&A box, and I'll be able to see those and be able to ask our panelists, but we do have all of the participants muted for this since we do have so many people online. The other thing I want to tell you before we get started is just a little bit about CaringMatters. We're so happy to have all of you here with us. If you're not familiar with CaringMatters, we are a grassroots organization that's focused on providing social and emotional and practical support services for people who are facing serious illness, supporting their caregivers, and also those who are grieving. And we have specialized groups and programs for children, adults, and families that have been developed over a 31-year history of this organization. We've definitely spent the past several months pivoting those programs to be able to continue reaching people in the community that are facing unprecedented illnesses, complicated grief, either from losses due to COVID or, losses that are occurring. And I think, kudos to all the volunteers and my colleagues who've, worked so hard trying to make sure that people get the help that they need and that it's accessible to them. And our services are all free. So, we really try to be as accessible as we can. And then we also have community education, which this is part of our community education program, where we really strive to cultivate constructive conversations about serious illness, aging, caregiving, grief, loss, and advanced care planning, issues that people are sometimes hesitant to talk about. There can be uncomfortable and awkward, which is part of the reason we're here today, and part of the goal behind this film is that we all need to get better at speaking grief and speaking about these challenging and sensitive topics. So we have a lot of resources that are available on our website at caringmatters.org. You'll find contact information for all the staff, including Jim and Gilly, who are here today, and myself. And I encourage you to, look at the website and at our events that are coming up and all the resources that we've built out for school professionals and families and, COVID resources, really just to try to be as inclusive as we can and also proactive in being able to connect people with community resources. So that is a little bit about Caring Matters. I am gonna say one other thing that fellow panelists and I talked about when we were planning this is, I think it bears mentioning that grief can be very triggering for people in many ways. And we recognize that if this conversation is triggering for you in any way, please feel free to step away from the webinar and don't hesitate to reach out for help, because one of our main messages of this organization is that Caring Matters is here to support you. And we don't want anyone to grieve, or struggle with caregiving or illness on their own. We're here to support you. And there's also many national and local crisis hotlines that are there to help people who may be struggling with their grief, especially during this time. So please keep that in mind and know that we are very sensitive to that, and please be sensitive and gentle with yourself as well, which I think a lot of people need to remember too when they come to this film, because of the universal themes and so many things that strike so close to home for all of us. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. Jim, if you want to get started, and then Gilly and Maria, and then after we do a brief introduction, we'll kind of look at the poll and see who's here with us.
Okay. I'm Jim Rossi. Good morning, everybody. I discovered Caring Matters 22 years ago, right after my first wife died, and I was in the first support group, grief support group that they conducted, and it was a life-saving experience. And a few years later, I started as a volunteer, so I've been a volunteer for quite a while now. And then 2 years ago, a year after I had retired from my usual work, the opportunity to become the director came up, and I'm so happy to do that. So I'm director of adult bereavement, and we'll share more later about what our activities are too. So it's good to see everybody. So many people, 91 people it looks like.
Thanks, Jim. Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm so glad that you chose to spend some of your very precious time with us today. My name is Gilly Cannon. I'm the Director of Children's Bereavement Services at Caring Matters. I have a passion for working with children and their families, and this has led me to the work that I do today, supporting children in our county, schools, and anyone who works with children to support them in their grief. And I'd be very happy to support you.
Hi, I'm Maria Collins. I'm the Vice President of the New York Life Foundation. I also would like to mention I am a social worker. I did work in direct service for many years before moving over to a corporate foundation. A little bit about our foundation, why New York Life. New York Life is an insurance company, a national insurance company, and we have really found there was a gap in supporting bereaved youth and their families. So over a decade ago, New York Life embarked on really understanding this issue. What are the resources? Who are the players and partners out there that we should be connecting with? And since that time, we've invested over $50 million. And I don't think that provides the depth or breadth of it, because it's not about the financial, it's not only about the financial contribution, because financial contributions definitely help support the programs. But I think our lens, as well as our dedication by the staff, our employees and agents, working with our local bereavement organizations and organizations that support bereaved youth and their families really state why we're in it. It's really part of our day-to-day mission. And in honor of the film, I'm also a bereaved child. My father died when I was 23, right after I graduated college. And I think that has always defined me, and I keep it. So I would wear the black shirt with father on it very, very proudly. So thank you for spending the morning with us.
Thank you, Maria. I think you bring up a really good point that everyone should know about the people that work in this space, is that for, I would say, probably the vast majority of us, it's personal grief and personal loss and experience that bring us to this work, because it's not often easy. But I think it's healing in that in doing this work, we're able to be our authentic selves and share our experience. So thank you for sharing that. And I think we all join you in kind of embracing this work as people who've lived a lot of these experiences. So thank you. I am going to end the poll right now and let you know that we have very interesting mix of people. We have about 13 caregivers, family or elsewhere, family or other. We have 5 education professionals, some mental health professionals. We've got some faith leaders and some volunteers with us. And it also looks like we have the vast majority, 73% of the people with us today are from Montgomery County. A few from elsewhere in Maryland, DC, and about 13 people from outside DC. So welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's always kind of interesting to see who's in the online room with us. So just to get started with the discussion, Maria, I'm going to go back to you and ask you to kind of start us off and tell us more about this project, about this film, the primary goal, and what everyone involved with it, why they thought like we need this project to help people better speak about grief. So,
well, thank you. So I was honored to be contacted by Penn State WPSU regarding this documentary. And I think it's more than a documentary. It's a movement, it's an initiative that really provides a platform, a safe space to talk about it. We know from our research, we did a poll in 2017 of individuals, general public, as well as people that have lost a parent. And the one thing that was very clear in all of our research and all of our polling is that people shy away from talking about it. They don't have the words, they don't know what to say, and they're uncomfortable because they're also dealing with grief. I always stated that you can protect yourself against certain things, but everyone, it's a guarantee, everyone dies. And it's a very hard thing to say, death and dying. It took me a long time, even as a social worker. So when we decided to embark on this journey, we wanted it to be authentic. We wanted it to be something that, one, pays tribute and honor to people that we love and lost. 2, provide tools to individuals that want to support our friends and families who are grieving, who's grieving the loss of their loved one, and get better at that. And 3, a platform to have these conversations in a real way. Because I think that it's a difficult conversation. And I use the analogy of Inside Out. When you talk about your loved person, there is a sadness, right? But also there's a joy because you're sharing that person with the world and they will never be forgotten. So I think this film does that job very well. And I hope everyone who has watched it and is on this call today sees how wonderful this can be for the world right now. And it would be a missed opportunity if I said right now, during this unprecedented time where we're all grieving different things. Some of us are grieving someone who was lost to COVID or just died during COVID, but not from COVID. Some of us are missing things. So it is an opportunity to have a real conversation on, one, how we're feeling, but two, how do we support each other?
Oh, thank you. I think that gives everyone kind of a sense of where this project came from. I will say two things. Somebody asked in Q&A if the film is going to continue to be available online, and the answer is yes. It's at speakinggrief.org. You can watch the documentary there online, so it is still available. And also a real quick thank you to my colleague Maria Alvarez, who you see on the screen, has been doing some tech support and helping. So she is our office manager and one of our volunteer coordinators, and she works a lot with the Children's Grief Program. So thank you, Maria, for joining us and helping support the webinar today. So people were wondering, who's Maria Alvarez? She's our colleague, so thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, and we're gonna do a short clip that I think will lead us more into the conversation. It's a clip of a woman named Megan Devine speaking, and she's very well known in the grief space. She's incredibly articulate. She's an amazing writer. I think it adds such credibility and weight to this project that she was so involved. And so there is a clip that's kind of near the end of the film that really struck me as one that summarized, you know, why we're here today. But basically what Megan is saying, that if we want to get better at grief, we really need to open these conversations and have them, and that conversations about grief are really conversations about love. And I think that that is really something that should drive us when we're all thinking about this film and why it is so very important. So we'll just go ahead and move on. And Jim, I have a question for you. As we were just saying, conversations about grief are really difficult, but I think in view of COVID and the pandemic, it's really complicated these conversations even further and impacted our ability to support each other. So if you want to kind of address that question from your perspective, and then Gilly, if you'd like to weigh in from kind of the children's perspective, that would be great. You're muted though.
COVID has affected us all in so many ways. Yes, and tomorrow will mark the 6-month date that we started to home quarantine, most of us. And for me, even though my life is going okay, I'm grieving. We're all grieving, even if we have not experienced a recent death of someone close. We're trapped at home. We don't know what the future will bring and when the future will come. We can't have human contact very much, and all of that is causing us to grieve. The grief of people who are grieving someone who died is very much affected by COVID. If the person died of COVID, there's COVID in the news 24 hours a day. People are all talking about it, and they can't escape COVID for a few minutes because it's overwhelming with adults. And I know Gilly will talk about some things that are different with children. It's hard to get a break from COVID, and that constant reminder of it and what happened to the person who died is very painful. Also, the survivors don't understand what happened. There's no why or how and what happened and why. That's very difficult. They were unable to say goodbye often. They were unable to say, I love you. The person might have been in the hospital, and the only human contact the dying person had was the nurses. And they were unable to be there. And all of this scares us when our friends and neighbors have gone through this, because we don't understand it and we can't relate to it. So there's not much conversation. Often the the spouse or the adult child had the responsibility of having to turn the ventilator off, and that's a monumental responsibility. So, and they don't talk about it, and we don't ask them about it and acknowledge it. So also, I think that because I talk to people every day, 5 or 6 people who are grieving, and they often say that when their loved one died of COVID, everyone else is afraid of them. They somehow think talking on the phone with them, they'll catch COVID, and it's bizarre, but that's what happens. And other deaths that were not due to COVID during the pandemic period, some of the things are very similar. No rituals, no religious ceremonies, no visitors, a burial with just a few persons present. Often it's 8 people are allowed at the cemetery. No hugs, no handshakes. Um, and the survivors are haunted by the thought that the person they love died alone, and that's really hard. So things are rough enough, but with this, people don't tend to connect. And so that's why we tried to help them with that. People can't visit, they can't hug, they can't shake hands, they can't send presents, and they can't travel to another state to visit people. So the effect is because of the conversation, but also the physical aspects of our limitations because of the pandemic and the quarantine. So, Gilly, you might want to.
Yes, thank you. Certainly, children and teens have been feeling all of the things that adults have been feeling without the, the extra piece of having experience of living. And developmentally, they also don't necessarily have all the understanding that we as adults have of what it's like to experience all of these things. And none of us have experienced this pandemic before. This is new for all of us. The thing about the pandemic is the isolation, which was already difficult. And then if you add on the isolation of grief, so they've got a double whammy. Anybody who's grieving has a double whammy. They are cut off from family, they're cut off from friends. And what children and teens need so much is to have their peers to support them. That's who certainly teens go to for support. And they were missing them already. And if they're grieving, it's hard for them to necessarily connect with them because they've had this experience that none of their peers have had, and they haven't necessarily seen them since that experience. And so what I'm observing is that these children are, having all kinds of responses, both to the pandemic and to their losses. And because of our distance from them, we need to be even more intentional about how we think about supporting them.
Yeah, I think that's all very true. And this film does, go into, in broad strokes, how children react differently in very distinct ways to the grief and the stress that goes with it. Maria, I know that your organization has done a lot of research on children's grief, and that you have, some insight on how children are reacting as well. Do you want to speak to that and kind of some of the themes that we saw in the film about children's behavior?
Well, I think the one thing that we have to, just put out there is that children are the forgotten mourners. In society, unfortunately, children are not at the table when it comes to dealing with their loss and their grief and many other things, right? So I think the film does a great job. When the young girl says about losing her brother, and they didn't really include her in saying, well, your parents must be, it must be a difficult time for your parents, but it's a difficult time for a young person as well. We have focused on childhood bereavement, and that has evolved to ensure that parents are also supported, and I think the film does a great job. It is a family dynamic. When a parental person a caregiver or mother or father dies in the family, or even a sibling, you have to support both. And they do need, and I bet Gilly can speak to it better, they both need support on traditions, which you saw, you know, with the balloon ceremony and that happy birthday every year. One of the programs I would like to highlight that we've funded and supported is the Resilient Parenting Program, which really focuses on how to support the parent to support the child. And that's through Arizona State. And it is the longest running proven valid family bereavement program in the country. And I only bring that up is because the film does identify, like, there are tools out there to support both the child and the parent or caregiver and others that need it. But we do need to focus on the child, because we know, and it's not that every child, and Gilly, please jump in, it's not that every child will act out, but children who are not supported, it is proven, will and have higher risks of academic, dysfunction, substance use, depression, suicide. That has been seen. Actually, academic functioning is losing a parent is the key indicator for academic functioning, if the child will do well. So when a child loses a parent and not supported after that, their academics, unfortunately, are impacted.
Well,
Gilly,
I don't know if you have anything more to add to that, Gilly, or?
Just one thing. Yes, everything that you said, Maria, I absolutely agree with. And I think it's so important that we remember to ask children how they are doing, and also that we give them an opportunity to tell their story from their perspective. Very often the adults have told the story already, and so the children don't get that opportunity. So that is really important, that we listen to them and we validate them and we support them. The biggest predictor of how well a child adjusts after a death is how well their main caregiver has coped. So that is why the Resilient Parenting Program is so important. And we are actually launching our own parenting while grieving program in January, precisely for that reason.
Thank you. So I have learned that there's a little box that I need to check so that you can hear my computer. So I'm going to go ahead and share the second clip, or attempt to share the second clip that I had planned. So hold on for me for 1 second.
Majority of times when we're giving direct advice, we are way off the mark. Effective support is the attitude of open listening and accepting whatever they're saying, and not feeling pressure about somehow taking that feeling away from them.
Most people have really good intentions and they really want to support their person. But if what you're doing is actually causing harm or distress to the person receiving it, you need to be willing to hear that. We want to match your good intentions with your outward behavior.
There's definitely a call for humility, because you will mess up grief work. Let's put that out there. I can't even begin to number the times that I've made mistakes. I've made mistakes in this interview around what it is to grieve and what it is to offer support. And so I think it's important to just off the bat know that you're going to mess it up. And if they're hurt by something that we say, pivot to the mistake. Don't beat yourself up around it. But understand that it's not a griever's job to course correct you. Then actually engage in how you can reconnect beyond the mistake. I think when you're authentic and say, I didn't mean that. I really mean to say, I see you're hurting. I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you. Those are powerful, powerful support foundations.
I understand that people don't want to say the wrong things, but one of the difficult parts for me is people don't talk about Nate. They'll ask about my girls, ask about my grandchildren, but they will not. It is as if he never existed. And that's rough because I like to talk about Nate. He's my son. I would say even if you ask me a question about Nate and it got me choked up, that's okay. I don't mind. To be able to share a little bit of his life is wonderful.
I've heard many people say I don't want to make them even more sad than they are by reminding them of the person's name or asking how they are. I 100% can guarantee that person's going to be sad whether or not you say their person's name. People aren't going to make the bereaved sadder. On the contrary, there's the feeling of, wow, my person's being remembered by somebody else.
The problem is that we're culturally conditioned to instantly cheer somebody up. When we do that, what we're doing is silencing the person we care about. Your job as a support person isn't to make somebody feel happy, it's to make somebody feel heard. Even though it seems weird to us, letting people tell the truth about their pain is the best way to support someone.
So I really like that clip because I feel like there's some really powerful notions in there. The idea of being afraid of saying the wrong thing, wanting to avoid talking about a loved one to not upset somebody, and the importance of listening. And so I feel like those are some good themes we can talk about. Jim, do you want to, start talking about, I know that you have a lot of experience with counseling people about helpful things to say to a grieving person and things that are not so helpful, but we know everyone's intentions are good. We want their intentions to match, their actions and what they say. But would you like to address that point?
This clip says a lot about what not to say and what to say, but there's also how to support without saying anything. So an important part of grieving is loneliness. When people don't say anything and don't support them, people feel abandoned, and that complicates that loneliness, and it's a horrible thing. People do want to help, and they mean well, but we have no experience with it, maybe. We've never been taught what to do with grieving people, how to help grieving people. And so it's common to just disappear and shy away. I just want to point out what I've heard over these 22 years that people say to each other that you should not say. So common things, I know just how you feel. That you don't know how anyone feels, and you're never going to know. All grief is different. Everyone grieves an individual way that's different from everyone else. So saying I know just how you feel means you mean nothing. I'm equal to you with this. So we don't want to say that. And he's in a better place now. Maybe that's true, but the survivor is not in a better place, and that's negating the grief. So we don't want to say things like that. We don't want to say at least. Often the comments begin with at least. At least you have your children. At least you had him for 30 years. At least you have your health. Yes, that's all true, but the person died and you're grieving, and that negates your grief in a way. It doesn't acknowledge it. he's not suffering anymore. That's true, but you are. So these are things not to say. Also, people do not like it when you say, be strong, don't cry, get back to work, I think you should do this. And they don't know what's going on with you. They don't really, are not capable of knowing what's going on with you. Another thing is, is there anything, if there's anything you need, please call me. You're never going to call. It's hard to pick up a phone. It's hard to push the numbers. So what we should be doing is listening. Don't try to fix. Don't try to make them better. Don't judge them and say, it's been 6 months. 6 months is like yesterday sometimes. We don't want to share our own grief because it's not relevant. What's relevant is the person who's suffering. And we don't want to be nosy and say, so it was a suicide. What was the method? That's the most horrible thing to say, but that's the first thing people say. So another thing, when people ask, what can I do? What the grieving person needs is human contact and someone to listen. No one listens to them. They cut them off and want to move forward. So do they really need flowers and plants and casseroles? Does that take away the grief? No. The best thing is to say, if you're the griever, please say, please tell me something you remember about him or her and what they meant to you. That is the kindest, that is the greatest gift you can get from a friend or a neighbor or a coworker or a family member. People are afraid to do that, as Maria said, because they think that's going to bring you down, maybe, but it doesn't. It honors the person who died, and your biggest fear when you're grieving is that the memories will die. And if someone can help share memories themselves that honor the person that died, that's the greatest gift. So that's kind of what not to do and what to try to do, and just to sit and listen. And then before COVID, it was a hug, a hand on someone's shoulder, and sit together. It's a little different now, but still you can connect by social media and by Zoom and other ways, and just be there is the main thing.
I think that's those are very powerful words of guidance. And I hope that as we're all kind of reflecting on that, we'll think back to the gentleman in the video, Nate's father, and how we all need to remember that that's what people want, is to be able to still talk about their loved one, whether it brings tears or smiles. They still want to talk. So I hope that people will kind of remember that giving people the space to talk about their lost loved ones can be very healing and very positive, even if it may not seem like it. So I think that's really important. Another thing that goes along with all of this and kind of the awkwardness of some of these conversations and trying to kind of find our way is the notion of secondary losses that come from the death of a loved one. And I think the film did a lot to kind of explore that topic. And I know, Gilly, it's something that we've talked a lot about, and I think it's something that you talk a lot about in your work with school counselors and professionals to kind of explore, you know, what are the secondary losses this family is having, because a lot of times that needs to be addressed almost before the grief can be addressed. So if you want to kind of speak about that and how it factors into the support that people need, especially now during the pandemic.
Yes. There are so many secondary losses that come from that grief. That first loss, which is the loss of your loved one, and it can snowball. And I often use the example of children who come from Central America who have to often leave in a hurry after a violent death, and they come often to Montgomery County, so right here where we live, and what they leave behind is everything. They leave their school, their home, their language, their culture, their family, their friends. everything that they knew they have left behind because of their primary loss, which is the death of the person that they loved. And they come to this country and they don't even have the language to express it. And I know that sounds like an extreme example, but it really, for me, reminds me of what a child is bringing to anything that they're doing after somebody has died. They are carrying all of these secondary losses with them. And so it's important for us to understand, what things they're worrying about. Darren in the film talks about how he had a problem, he had to remortgage his home, and he had problems finding childcare. Now, all of those things have ramifications for the children. They're all affected by that, and they worry about these things tremendously. They don't really understand them, but they know that money might be tight and they can't get all their school supplies, or they may worry that they have to go to a new school, or they have to go and live with somebody else. So all of these things kind of can even overshadow the initial grief, and they talk about that in the film as well. What I'm hearing at the moment is when a counselor, often school counselor, calls me and asks for support for a family, the first thing that I will ask them is, when did the person die? Because if it was 2 days ago, their needs at 2 days versus 2 months or 2 years are very, very different. And so I ask, do they have enough food on the table? Do they have somewhere to live? Are they going to be do they have work? Because if the family is dealing with these losses, secondary losses, they can't even focus on their primary loss until some of those very basic needs have been met. So it's important for us to really meet families where they are. And that's really the bottom line. If you want to support somebody, see where that family is and what they need, not what you want to give them, but what they need, and try to help them find that first. Then they can move on to sort of work on some of the other losses and some of the other feelings that they've got.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I'm so glad that you could share that insight with everyone. And Maria, I think, when we talked last week in preparation for this, and you made really clear that a huge theme of this film for us to really understand is how we can better support people who are grieving. Like, we're all going to grieve, but how do we better support? And I think I'd love for you to address that more. And then also something else we talked about, which I think really bookends the film in a very vivid way for me, was the grocery store scene, where at the beginning and then the alternate version of it at the end, and how impactful that is. The body language and the gestures say so much. And so if you want to kind of talk about that and expand on kind of that theme of caring for griever families. Yeah.
Absolutely. So actually, Anne in the chat is stating, like, how do you do that? I'm not the expert on how to do it. And I think it's a long process, as I said, even I think for a clinician or just a regular person. I think, the film does a great job. It's like, you're going to mess up, and how you address that. Like in the film, avoiding someone, not even making eye contact or shying away, unfortunately, it hurts, right? As a person. But you don't have to say anything. You can, as Jim said, like, you can just look at someone. I know we're in a very unique time where we can't touch people and we can't hug them the same way, but you can do an air hug. You can do something that acknowledges that they are still grieving. As I stated, I think early on, we did a lot of research, and grievers stated that their grief support waned within 3 months after their loss, on average, and grief doesn't go away, right? The loss, you're always bereaved. You always lost that person. And I think when we look at the film, it says, you know what, we're not going to always know what to say, but we can definitely figure out how to do it. And I actually had a conversation yesterday, which I think is very to their comments, is that you can be supportive like someone says, how about if I don't remember their birthday or when they died? You know what? The most difficult time for, and Jim and Gilly, please chime in here, is actually one, yes, the anniversary of their death, right? So I do remember my father and my father-in-law's anniversary, and we actually go to church on those days. And but also holidays. If you don't remember the person, maybe it's a holiday, or maybe it's the person's birthday, like if they're your friend. And it doesn't have to be, because having a conversation is so difficult. So actually, when I was talking yesterday, someone says, you know, even sending a text, people might chat with you over a text, you know, and let them talk it out, like give them the opportunity to kind of express themselves. And also that might help them. Some people are willing to have that conversation face to face or Zoom to Zoom. And some people want, maybe because their body language will show that they're hurting, but sometimes it's easier for them to kind of chat it out with you. And I think that COVID has really amplified our opportunity to do that, because everyone can't be physically together. So this might be an opportunity to do that. And yes, look for resources on our website, because we did hear a lot, like, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to say, I don't remember their anniversary. But if there was something to support you, a tool to support that, maybe you can. And I think the grocery store and the film itself is like, supporters can play an active role in reaching out. I think everyone has said, you know, the secondary losses, as Gilly said, like maybe doing someone's laundry, maybe inviting them over for dinner, or maybe just cooking them dinner. It might help with some of the secondary losses, or befriending someone that's new in your town, not knowing their circumstances, but later finding out and being supportive. So I think those are, you know, our intentions are always, I know, in a good place. It's sometimes hard to act on it because we also carry a lot with us every day. So we hope that, as I said, it's not just a documentary, but the actual, if you go to speakinggrief.org, there are a lot of tools and resources on the website to really help you have those conversations, or those little gestures, because that's what actually, again, I'm going to quote our 2017, because it's coming from real people in the US saying, you know what, just sending me a card. I love receiving still physical cards. I'm going to be honest, like it makes my day. And you know what, it could be like, it could be like, I'm just thinking about you today. Do you know, like, or the holiday. So it is just a way for us to connect, because we would want that in return. Mm-hmm. And it is also giving you, hopefully, a couple of actionable items. Jim did a great job in saying what to say, what not to say. And I've made those mistakes. I'm like, oh my goodness, I know how you feel. I don't know how you feel. So I hope everyone takes that. But we would love questions and comments to respond to.
So we have a few comments here that we're talking about. People are talking about how it's hard to read people's body language from Zoom when you can't hug. And people are talking about the importance of someone showing up and, you know, mowing their lawn for them, or, you know, encouraging them to take a shower and come on, you know, and put on some clothes and come for a walk with me. You know, those sort of things people are commenting on. And someone else asked about stages of grief and healing. And it's something that we talk about a lot at CaringMatters, about how, you know, the lexicon of grief and the 5 stages, and how, you know, it's really not a linear process. It's a zigzagging all over the place process. And so, Gilly, I don't know if you want to talk more about that. Someone asked in the Q&A, you know, about these stages, and I'm sure it's so much more complicated now than ever before. But it was never meant to be a linear notion of, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yes, grief is messy. It just is messy. And because everybody grieves uniquely, you know, there's no recipe for healing. That everybody has to go through their own grief in their own timeline, in their own way. So, you know, even children in the same family, like we saw on the film, each child is going to grieve differently in different ways, depending on how old they are and where they are developmentally. And with these different feelings that we have, it's not just that you go through a feeling and then you're done with it. Something can trigger you and you're right back there again. And so it's very normal for you to have some feelings one day and then to die down and have something else the next day. Grief really does come in waves. And, you know, if you've ever been at the sea, sometimes those waves are huge and they knock you over, and sometimes they just tickle your feet. And that's really how grief works. It doesn't have, I always say to people, the only rule about grief is there are no rules. And so I think that's what's important to remember too. And if you are grieving, to know that whatever way you are doing it and whatever way your children are doing it is normal and is okay. And we just, as helpers and supporters, our important job is to support the griever how they need to grieve, not how we think they should be grieving or where we think they should be in a certain stage, because that messiness, I mean, it's true. And the only way to cope with your grief is to go through it. I will just say for children, just so you know, they don't grieve the same way as adults do. And I like to call it puddle jumping. They jump in and out of their grief. And so when they are in their grief, it's like adults deep in their grief, but they can only manage to face these strong emotions in small bites. So if you want to have a conversation with a child, don't be surprised if they answer your question and then they say, can I have ice cream? Because they're done with the talking for now. And so I think, again, it's about how do you find your way into the conversation with a child, for instance. And I think Anne on the chat mentioned that asking, sharing a memory first is very helpful. Saying, I was just thinking about Dad the other day and how, you know, he always made us laugh by making funny faces. Have you been thinking about Dad recently? And so you share a piece of yourself and your memory of that person, and then you open the conversation up to the child. And I think that that's a good way in. And the other thing is about children is that silence we talked about previously, that silence says a lot. Children, if you're not talking about it, children will take their cue from you and they will feel that they can't talk about it. I like to say that children are really excellent observers, but they're poor interpreters. So if you're not talking about it, they don't know why you're not talking about it. They think it's about them very often. And so it explained to them, you know, I was feeling really sad today and it just made me cry. And it's okay to cry, because that's how you show your love. So you are showing them how to grieve. And so by role modeling how you grieve, you can show a child how to grieve too. And that's all based in communication and the relationship. And if you can just begin that conversation, you've done so much to help children.
And I'm going to jump in here. There are a couple of things that I think, Gilly, you know, one, you know, the Day of the Dead, right, is big in the Latin community.
Yeah.
But Coco, the movie, is a great way, for me, I thought, a great way to introduce the concept of remembering your loved person. I thought it was done beautifully. So it is an opportunity to show the film and have a discussion, because children will love the movie anyway, because it's beautifully done. I think Pixar always does a great job. I love all their movies. Second, books. Books are a window to our you know, other people, and we can see ourselves in books. We lose ourselves in books. We do have, I think there are tons of books out there. New York Life does have a partnership with First Book, which for the educators and people that work in centers and nonprofit organizations, you can go to First Book. We have a grief and loss section that we revamped with them, and they're no cost books. And you can also apply for funding to receive some of those books. So I'm going to highlight that because I think there's also discussion guides there. And the last thing, part of this our partnership with Penn State and doing this, we actually created something for the partnership, but then we took it upon ourselves to actually expand it. And it's called Kai's Journey. And it's a 3-part book for younger children that discuss in a very simple way. It is not a complicated book about the loss. And it follows Kai, who lost his dad on the first year, and his losses. And we wanted to really identify 3 things. One, I think, Gilly, you put it right. Like, sometimes I'm sad, sometimes I'm happy as a child, and recognizing that, but they still want to be connected to their loved person, right? So he still wanted to be connected to his dad. 2, peer support, being around other kids that have lost someone, so they can, I volunteer at TAPS, Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. And the one thing that I love about that is that they always say, like, it's a family that you didn't think you needed, or wanted, but you need, right? And I think peer support is a super important part of the grief process, because you don't have to say, I lost my dad. People know that you lost your loved person, and they can relate to you. So I think it's an easier conversation potentially. And I'm not saying that it always is, but it gives an opportunity. And then the third thing about our book series is traditions, which I think are so important. Families have traditions or things that they do together, and it's a way to keep the memory alive. It may change and how it looks changes, but you can discuss it as a family and how it continues to keep, again, that person with you. So I highlighted, a couple of resources. You can go to the New York Life Foundation website to see that all of those resources, and all of our resources are free. So take a look there, but I did want to highlight them because I think children, you have to have different ways of connecting with them. And so I'm giving you a couple of ways. Pixar is not ours, though. Coco is not ours.
Gilly, do you want to talk about, we had a question about, that came up about, I know we're getting ready to end, but there are a couple of important questions about what Caring Matters is offering for children right now, like what we're doing. And then after that, Jim, there was a question for you about at what point is grief counseling or grief support groups advisable for people? And so, Gilly, do you want to start about what Caring Matters is doing right now for kids?
Sure. So we have a number of programs for grieving children and their families. We do have a peer support program. Our program is called Good Grief Clubs, and they are mainly run in schools in the county. Since Montgomery County schools shut down and is only working virtually, we have not been able to offer them yet through the county, but we have been working with some social service agencies to offer some Good Grief Clubs. We have one happening right now, and as school picks up, we're hoping that we will run some more. We also have a wonderful program called Family Nights, where we invite the whole family to come and do an art project about the person who has died. We have a wonderful art educator who comes in and helps us devise these amazing projects and start a conversation about that person in the family. We are going to move these online, and we will be holding them virtually. We hope that families will join us to really begin a conversation about their loved one. And the third thing is we have a camp called Camp Erin. We've also moved that virtually, and that will be happening in November. And that's for all children ages 6 to 17. And you can find the information on our website. So we would love to have you.
And Jim, do you want to talk about our support groups and how they're operating right now? And I know you have a philosophy about the right time for someone to join a group, or that there's no real perfect time, but it's pretty individual. So if you want to speak to that before we end, that would be great.
Right. At the time COVID hit, I had no support groups, and little by little, I built back 16 support groups now. They're divided. They're all done with Zoom. The older people meet during daytime, and others meet in the evening. The groups are divided by relationships. So there are multiple spousal groups, parent loss group, death by suicide group, a COVID group, and adult child loss. And then I also have mixed groups, So no one has to grieve alone. That's our motto. And if they don't fit into any specific category, we still want to help them. So it begins with a conversation with me on the phone, and they find out about us by the website. I have relationships with social workers and psychologists and insurance companies too, Maria, and they refer people, and people who have been in groups refer people years later because they're friends, and we decide together, the person and I, whether it's time to try or not, and I leave it up to them. Hospices make them wait 3 months. I don't believe that's necessary. I think it's their choice. And if they join, and I always say, if you join this week and it's too intense, you'll take a break for a few weeks and we'll talk again. And when you feel ready, you can rejoin. That's no problem. So that's kind of how they go. Some of the groups are finite, certain number of months. Most of them are open, so people stay and leave when they don't need it any longer, and I add new people. You've both been talking about support groups with for children. The parents of the children come together in support groups. I facilitated an under 50s spousal group for 18 years, and I finally put it back together again now this past week. And they talk about, they think the way their children are grieving is abnormal and sick, and they're very worried about it. And when they share with each other, it helps. Also, often parents don't talk about the death of the father with the children, even though they may be teenagers, and because they don't want to hurt them. Well, they're hurting already. And so when they share with each other and give each other support and advice, it works really well. So that's an example of it. And often people who have been in these support groups, as I was, come back and become volunteers facilitating support groups. And so that's done in honor of the person who died too. So I think that.
No, go ahead.
Is there anything else you meant?
No, I think that's wonderful. I just want to let people know that if we have any Q&A that we didn't get to, that we'll look through those and connect with some of our colleagues here at Caring Matters to offer support. And we just want to encourage people to reach out to Jim and Gilly and Maria. I'm going to put up a slide with their emails in a moment. But I just want to ask Jim really quickly, because we want to end on a high note. You talked about the grief and gratitude scale. You talk about that a lot. And they talk in the film about how grief has no end game, but there's always hope. And so I just was wondering if you would share your grief gratitude scale with everyone. And then I will put the contact information up on the screen, and we will all bid you farewell. But Jim, if you please share, that'd be great.
So real quickly, how do people become functional again? They build a life without the physical presence of the person who died. How do they do that? They retain the memories. The memories that were painful at first become bittersweet memories, and they share with everybody else those memories, hopefully. And then a lot of them discover that service to others is the best way to heal. And that's what I was talking about working with hospice caring and Caring Matters. And so the way we try to talk about it when I train volunteers is that I'm a Libra, so think of that scale. And there's pain, and then there's gratitude for what we had. And the pain is so heavy that the gratitude disappears at first, and little by little, we hope they recognize that how they were so fortunate and so blessed to have that person in their life those years, and to keep talking about it and keep remembering it and keep honoring that person. And you can honor them with memorials, you can honor them with scholarships, with contributions, with all kinds of things, but also just being a kind person who's empathetic with others. And you can do it by working with a support group, or you can do it by speaking to your next door neighbor. And remembering the gratitude, that's a strong feeling of a positive way that things may develop, hopefully. It could take years or it could take months to get there.
Thank you, Jim. Any other final closing thoughts, Gilly or Maria?
I would just like to end with a children's book, because Maria, I'm passionate about them too. And this is from The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. And here's a question. What do we do when our hearts hurt? Asked the boy. We wrap them with friendship, shared tears and time till they wake hopeful and happy again. And that's what we can do for the people that we care about. And here's the beautiful picture for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilly. Maria, thank you so much for joining us. We're very honored to have you as our guest on the panel today. Your expertise and your passion for this work is evident and shines through in how you speak about it. And so thank you so much for joining us and being part of it, and really appreciate it so much. Now, by saying, if you go to caringmatters.org, you can get all of the contact information for our staff. You can reach out to myself, Jim, or Gilly. I'm happy to connect you with Maria if you have questions for her directly. And thank you for bearing with my technical difficulties as we brave this new world of community education online. And I promise you it will get smoother. Every experience is a learning experience. But I could not have been more lucky and grateful to have these wonderful panelists with me today, and the help of my colleague, Maria Alvarez. So thank you all, and have a lovely day. Be gentle with yourself, and you know, we're all here for you. So please don't go it alone. So have a great day, everyone. Thanks.